That must be Rob Johnson Jr. there. Good to see you there, young man. And so we are the DSM Discovery Group. We meet on the third Wednesday of every month. It's good to see Phil. Phil's one of our co-founders, and it's great to see him here. And we welcome you. We are a gathering of community leaders who care about our communities and creative problem solving for our leadership, for our organizations and our communities. And we are not a political organization or a religious organization. We meet for creative problem solving. That's our focus. And so we are so thankful that you're willing to join and learn together with us. We invite you to join our Facebook group, the DSM Discovery Group. We want to continue sharing ideas between meetings, continuing the conversations on the topics that we've covered. And so just send an invite there, and we will be glad to have you participate in that. So this morning, we are very pleased to have Rob Johnson and Deidre DeJear and Representative Ras Smith. And so I will introduce Rob, and then I will let Rob introduce the rest of his team. Now, Rob is an activist in our community for justice and inclusion. He's been involved in a number of campaigns. He serves a number of organizations and leadership. And Rob, as I watch all the things you do in your community, I can get tired just watching you working all the time. So I think I'll stop there because I could just go on naming all the different things that you're a part of. So glad to have you this morning, and we'll turn it over to you.
Thanks so much, Fred, and thank you to everyone for joining us this early morning on a Wednesday. You all are used to getting up this early on Wednesdays and going strong. Somebody said, no, we're not. That is all right. Well, hey, it is so good to see your smiling faces this morning and to hear your voices. One thing my mother used to say is it's always a good day when you're above ground, because it's better than any day below it. And so we are excited to continue to do this. When Fred asked me to do this, I told him, I couldn't think of anybody else to do this with. And without further ado, I want to make sure that I introduce the panelists who will be joining me today. And they are forces within themselves, and they have definitely made a difference and an impact with what they're doing currently right now. We have Representative Ras Smith, who is this your second term or third term being elected, Ras?
So January will be beginning my third term in January.
He is now a third term elected state representative out of Black Hawk County and Waterloo. And we are excited to have him this morning. He will be talking about advocacy, talking about how do we push forward, how do we advocate for the policies and for the things that we are looking to continue to get done. And then we have my friend, my good friend, Deidre DeJear. I've known Deidre. I got to tell a quick story about this because I do. Thanks, Deidre. So when I was in college, I came from Chicago, and Deidre and Shekinah and Kanisha had really established themselves on Drake University's campus. And I was this young 18-year-old whippersnapper from Chicago who thought I knew everything. And I can honestly say it was those three women, Deidre, Shekinah, and Kanisha, who really led the way of helping shape and mold me and maturing me and getting me to places. And one thing I love about it is that they never gave up. A lot of people don't know this about Deidre, but once I had to take summer school because I didn't do the right things all the time in college. And so I had to take a couple summer classes. I was so hungry, and people don't even know, but Deidre fed us a lot of times over the summer out of her own pocket, out of her own kitchen. And so we are forever grateful for the heart that she has, that she continues to serve, and that she's been doing this long before she even ran for office. She's always had this heart to serve and this heart to give. And so I'm fairly grateful that I can call her friend. But I'm also grateful for the simple fact is that she is now, not only is she a history maker, by being the only African-American nominated by a major party to run for a statewide ticket in this state of Iowa in 2018 with her historic run for Secretary of State. But she's also one of the only few Black women that's running a statewide PAC called 2020 Vision PAC. And she is not only doing that, but she's also talking about small businesses. She's talking about getting people back to work. She's talking about everything. And she is going to be talking about emerging leadership. She's going to be talking about how do we shape and mold our new leaders? How do we pull new leaders into the fold, which she is definitely passionate about. And so without further ado, I'm super excited. What we're going to do, Fred, is I'm going to toss it over to Ras to kind of get us kicked off talking about advocacy. Then we'll go to Deidre talking about emerging leadership. And then we'll come to me talking about community involvement. After we're done, then we'll open it up for questions. And if you have a question, please feel free to use the chat. Please feel free to put it in the chat. And we are happy to answer that after all three of these presentations. So without further ado, I'll kick it over to my good brother, Ras Smith, and we will get started with the advocacy piece. Thank you everyone for joining this morning.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Thank you for hopping on this brisk morning. It's good to see all your faces. I'm really excited to be here. And I think the topic of advocacy is one that is growing the further we move into the future. And I think it's important that we are keeping an open mind, but also are willing to be learners as we go through this process. Advocacy is something that means a lot of things to a lot of different people. But one thing that we know going forward is, and I think the most important thing is meeting folks where they are. When it comes to advocacy groups, whether you are establishing your knowledge of the topics that they're bringing forward, or there's something that's brand new to you, I think one thing that is extremely important as we move forward is keeping an open mind. We don't always get to dictate how folks advocate. It may not always be the way that's our preference, right? But if we're open to that and have ears to hear, then what we find is that those groups, that's what helps us build those relationships that last with advocacy groups. Because we know as we move forward, one thing that I'm going to continue to push for, I think a lot of folks on this call are going to continue to push for, is continual organizing. We have to organize all year round, and that also means strengthening relationships with advocacy groups. And we do that by, like I said, meeting them where they are. If they like to organize at the park on a rainy day, and that's what they do, it behooves us as community state leaders to meet them there. Not everybody's comfort zone is in a boardroom around the table. And that can't be our expectation, that everybody does things in a way that we like, in the way that we find most digestible. It's really important for us to have that open mind. But I also think that we have to encourage people to transition from advocacy to action. And that's part of where leadership really has to lean in as we move forward. Understanding that we can advocate for issues, but we also have to be strategic in how we move that advocacy into action. And that means having really the I guess the motivation to facilitate partnerships across groups. Right now, one thing that we're seeing specifically in the nonprofit sector is we have a lot of groups doing a lot of the same things. How do we build collaboration, right? So that we're not stretching ourselves thin, working with 7 different organizations who are all have a similar mission, right? Ensuring that we find that collaboration allows us to be more effective, but also allows us to create a strategy that can work with just more than one group. We know that advocacy groups are going to be unique, whether you're doing advocacy over political policy, whether you're advocating for allocation of dollars to a nonprofit. We know that there's uniqueness, but at the end of the day, in the state of Iowa, right now, as we move forward, understanding that COVID is going to have a financial impact, and I'm going to talk finances because at the end of the day, a lot of times the change that we're advocating for comes with some sort of dollar allocation, right, or some kind of request for dollars. And I think what we have to look at is that as time moves forward and resources are going to be allocated to our most urgent needs, whether that be helping out essential workers, which is something I'm extremely hopeful that we do allocate more resources towards, or it be COVID relief, dollars are going to be shorter in the next couple of years than we like to see, which means that for our advocacy groups and those who are listening and leading that charge, we have to find ways to make sure we can collaborate to be effective and efficient in our mission of achieving certain tasks. So I won't spend too much time after that, but I'm so thankful for you all joining. I do think that as we move forward, advocacy is going to be one of the most important things that we do, whether it's for organization, for our loved ones, or for a mission. We have to make sure that we're staying engaged and involved, allowing people to voice their concerns, allowing people to voice their opinions, and meeting them where they are. Also understanding that it's okay that we're uncomfortable sometimes, but we're behooved to listen with ears to hear, and take those individuals at their word and do the best we can to serve as many as we can.
Hey, Ross, can you talk a little bit about when somebody wants to go to the State House and advocate? Let's say somebody's major thing on here is education, or somebody's major thing on here is healthcare, or equal pay, labor laws. When they want to come advocate at the Capitol, what would that process look like, or where should they be going to do that? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, definitely. So I think there's a couple of different ways. So I would say first and foremost, this upcoming session, I think the opportunity to advocate in person is definitely going to be minimized, and I think that's for safety reasons, right? We don't want large crowds of people at the Capitol. But here's a couple of things that I would suggest doing. One is that find out what legislators have been supportive of your mission going forward. Who has in the past supported some of the things that you're looking for? Because you can be more targeted, right, by talking to those individuals, being more specific, not casting a broad net, trying to catch all 150 legislators at some point throughout the day. It's probably going to be unsuccessful. But if you can find those 5, have supported your topic, your agenda, that's one thing. Secondly, if there are advocacy days on the Hill, we have Mental Health Day on the Hill. We have days when we have our educators come to the Capitol. Those are opportunities to collaborate and align with those groups, like-minded folks who have like-minded issues, and bring that to the forefront. But I think probably the biggest takeaway and the most useful thing as a lawmaker will be practice the storytelling. Find those success stories, or those stories that allow us to have some sort of emotional response. Utilize those, because those are stories that we can share and we can tell on the House floor when we're advocating for whether it's more resource allocation for mental health, making sure we really fill out our K-12 mental health structure, whether it be what Return to Learn looks like, and making sure students have broadband access. I think regardless of what topic it is, having a story that you can tell that resonates helps us as lawmakers to be able to retell that story to our peers. Because if it's just an idea, it's easy to move away from that. It's easy to dismiss just a general idea. But a story that we all have that's similar, whether it be in our county, in our family, in our household, that's easily relatable. You create a sense of empathy automatically. Now we've built a bridge between two people, and that's always a helpful step in getting towards getting across the finish line when it comes to our mission to improve any of those topics that you brought up, Rob. So thank you. That's a great question. I know this upcoming session is going to be a little bit funky, but phone calls, emails, Zooms are going to be a way that we can still continue to advocate.
Hey, thank you, Ross. We'll be back with you here because we're obviously, we're going to be fielding questions here in a little bit. So thank you so much for that. Next up, we have the amazing Miss Deidre DeJear. She'll be talking to us a little bit about emerging leadership and things that she is working on currently right now. Deidre?
Awesome. Thank you, Rob. It's so good to see you, Representative Ras Smith. And it's so good to see all those amazing faces this morning. I see some people like Jackie Norris are multitasking. She's a superwoman. Good morning, Liz. Good morning, Bob. Good morning, Heather. All y'all. Good morning, Matt. And good morning, Phil and Fred. Thank you all for continuously engaging this group and making this space available. I remember when Fred and I first met about this group, and I couldn't commit to coming every morning, but I told Rob I was going to commit to coming today because 1, you all are an important group, and 2, I believe this is a very, very important issue. So when we think about emerging leadership, there's 2 buckets of people that I often think about. I think about our young folks, and I also think about individuals who have been putting in work, committing time, understanding their communities, but haven't necessarily been in a position to lead, hasn't necessarily been at a decision-making table. And so early on, when this pandemic happened, of course, the language that so many people were using was that, the pandemic turned our systems and how we think about things upside down. It created an opportunity for us to think about things in a different way because we were rebuilding. And if we were rebuilding, the commitment for so many people was, we're going to rebuild, we're going to do it the right way. We're going to rebuild, we're going to invest in our communities, we're going to invest in leadership, we're going to make sure that everybody's taken care of. And what we came to realize very, very quickly is that so many of our leaders were well-intended and wanted to do the right thing. They just weren't necessarily equipped with the tools or the understanding around the issues. And so Rob mentioned that we started a PAC called 2020 Vision PAC. And the idea around the name of that is that we want visionary leaders. And just because an individual lacks the vision right now doesn't mean that they're going to lack the vision tomorrow. And so when we think about emerging leaderships, we want our existing leadership to think a little bit differently. Because as those leaders emerge, wherever they're coming from, we want them to be coming into a space in which they're well received and they're utilized. Their gifts, their talents, the assets that they have to add, the value that they have to add, it is going to be received and acknowledged. And so we think about leadership from the 2020 Vision PAC vantage point with 4 different words: 1, engaged; 1, collaborative; 1, equity; and then humility. And the reason why those words are so important is, 1, we want our leadership to be engaged in the communities in which they serve. That engagement alone gives them the opportunity to understand the people that they're serving, whether it's an organization or it's a community. It gives them the opportunity to get to know individuals. It also gives them an opportunity to understand the challenges that exist in that community. The challenges that, whether it be creative problem solving or regular problem solving, that this is better to be able to resolve those challenges. The other thing that we like to consider is the humility component. So once that leader engages in the community, they understand the challenges, they're getting to know people better, then they try to problem solve. And sometimes as leaders, we think, oh, we've got to solve it all on our own. We've got to figure this out all on our own. But if we've learned anything throughout this entire 9-10 month process, is that we are stronger together. And what humility does is presents an opportunity for each and every leader to recognize, I don't have all the answers, 1, but it also empowers them to find the people that can help, to find the individuals that can move the ball forward, that can help that leader really come to terms with what the challenges are, why they exist, and how we can problem solve. The other component of leadership that is important to us is collaboration. As Rob mentioned, or as Ras mentioned earlier, we've got a lot of organizations in our communities that do great work. And sometimes organizations feel like they've got to be the heroes and do everything. But I think Des Moines and the city, the greater Polk County area, I found does an excellent job of figuring out how they can put their resources together in order to achieve an end goal. And so the collaborative spirit is always key as it relates to leadership, because it expands our net, it casts it wider, and it gives us the opportunity to help more people when we do that. And then the last thing is equity. Understanding who's not at the table, who is at the table, understanding that the policies and the procedures that we enact, how they impact the least among us. I'm one of those people who believe that if we can impact the least among us, then we can impact everyone else. My friend Cameron Middlebrooks often says, when America catches a cold, Black folks catch pneumonia, poor folks catch pneumonia. And so we can figure out how to solve pneumonia, we're going to figure out how to solve the common cold. And so if you think about those 4 words, that creates a table for those emerging leaders to, 1, join, so that their views, their mindsets, the values that they have are accepted. But it also creates somewhat of a platform and understanding for everyone to operate in this ecosystem together. Of course, there will be hierarchy. Of course, there will be reporting mechanisms and things along those lines. But needless to say, you're creating a space that's going to be the most inviting. Coretta Scott King, and I'm going to summarize this quote, said, "The fight for justice is fought at every generation." But obviously, it's not just the fight for justice that's fought at every generation. What we're seeing now today, the fight for equity is fought at every generation. The fight for voting rights is fought at every generation. The fight for education is fought at every generation. The fight for wages is fought at every generation. And if we're really going to move the ball forward to make sure that we're resolving the problems of today, I'm a firm believer that if we're going to be writers of our future, we got to be readers and knowledgeable of our past. And when I look at some of our history makers, I'm acknowledging all of the great work that they've done, but I'm also learning from their mistakes. And one of the critical mistakes that we've made in our history is that sometimes we end up skipping generations over as it relates to leadership. And so when it's time to pass the baton, when it's time to move things forward, we've got a gap. We're behind. And so it's ever more important for us to engage young leadership, and not only young leadership, but folks who have just not really been used in our community. They may not look like a leader to us. And so as you all are trying to find folks that can add some value to your organizations, to your boards, it's ever more important that you open your eyes in such a way that you're not looking for leadership that looks like you, and that you're not looking for leadership that you're used to seeing. That will challenge you to think outside of the box. Now, you might think of some things that may not work, and that's okay. But if you're challenging yourselves to think outside of the box, again, it's going to move the ball forward even further in this process of acknowledging the emerging leaders that exist in our community. And Ras made a statement earlier about meeting people where they are. That's how we meet them where they are. We see them for who they are, and not for what we want them to be, and not for what we need them to be, but we see them for who they are. And one of the things that is very, very critical is acknowledging the gifts and talents and the interests that people have. You know, I know a lot of times we think, oh, we need a female for a board, or we need a male for a board, or we need a Black female or a Latina female. You know, sometimes it's not necessarily just about them being or representing a certain demographic, but it's about their interests. You know, you put me on Des Moines Waterworks board, I don't know if I'm going to be all the way interested. I love clean water. I want to drink it. But I'm not reading up everything Bob Riley's reading up on as far as water goes. So I'm going to probably find somebody that shares his interest so that they can be passionate and add that value that needs to be added to that specific organization and to that specific board. And the last thing that I'll add, you know, when George Floyd was murdered earlier this year, you know, our young people hit the streets. They were angry, they were upset, they were trying to figure out a way to resolve the challenges that they see, and they were impacted by the hurt and the pain of so much history coming to a head to see a man die at the hands of a police officer. And those students, they were young, they were college age, they were high school age, they were impacted by COVID just as much as adults were. And there were minimal resources that were offered to them. They were anomalies. But what I saw was leadership, because they had no blueprint, they had no rubric, they just had pain, they had hurt, and they wanted to see something happen. And they took a leap of faith to get things done, and ended up getting a lot of attention that ended up being worthwhile in some degree. You know, fortunately for us, we didn't have a lot of the folks that were coming and really shifting the message for those protesters, like rioters. We didn't have a lot of those folks that were engaged in our communities, which really helped us to recognize the true factor in that matter was that those kids, those students could add some value. You know, those are the things that we want to figure out ways to harness. Because there's talent there, there's gifts there. It may not look like what we're used to seeing, but needless to say, there's value there. And I urge each and every one of you all to think of leadership in that way, using those 4 components. That's what I've got, Mr. Rob.
Hey, Deidre, so when you're looking at leadership and you're looking at all of these moments and opportunities, what would you say to somebody right now who's thinking, have I missed my moment to grab a young person or to mentor a young person? What would you say to them?
You haven't missed your moment. You've never missed your moment to engage someone that's young and mentor them, knowing that they'll be mentoring you too. You know, in every relationship, you know, I learned this from Suku Radia. You want to learn from them, but most importantly, or that you want them to learn from you, but most importantly, you're going to learn something out of the situation as well, which is the value add because it strengthens your ability to lead. But you've never missed a moment to engage a young person because young people are being born as we speak. So you're never going to miss it.
Hey, thanks so much, Deidre. We'll be coming back, everyone, with Deidre with questions once we are done. Thank you so much for tuning in and for being a part of this. Thanks so much, Deidre. So we've had Ras talk about advocacy. We've had Deidre talk about community, talk about our emerging leadership, and now I'm going to talk about our community involvement. I want to tell you a quick story about a young man who was down on Father's Day, and he was inside of Walmart. He was in Walmart, and he had his daughter with him. His daughter is 2 years old. So a young Black man, he's in Walmart. He has a 2-year-old daughter. They're walking around Walmart, and then he decides, you know what, we've walked around Walmart enough. It's time to go. But in true 2-year-old fashion, she's not ready to leave Walmart. She's like, nah, I'm not going. So in order to get her out of Walmart, this young Black man says to his 2-year-old daughter, hey, let's go get some ice cream. We all know that ice cream is a good bribery tool for a 2-year-old. This 2-year-old and all of her excitement and all of her burst of energy for ice cream, she takes off running to the door. She gets to the door, she crosses the threshold of the door, and she gets right to the place where that barrier is right before you hit the parking lot. She turns around and she realizes that her father, who usually chases after her when she starts to run, isn't running after her. He's walking. When he finally reaches back up to her, he gets down on one knee and she says to him, Dad, why aren't you chasing me? He looks at this 2-year-old little girl in the face and he says to her, because it is my job to protect us both. And as a Black man running out of Walmart, I would not have put us in a good situation. Many of you all may be able to relate to that and understand that our 2-year-olds and that our children just do things because they're safe in our presence, and that we have to think differently when it comes to moments like these. But yet, the African American and your Black friends and your family members and neighbors have to think a little bit differently when it comes to those moments. We want to talk about community involvement because these are moments that you may not think of every single time, but they do. There are moments where you may not understand exactly what is happening in your community or what is going on with your neighbor or why your neighbor feels the way that they feel, or your family member or your friend or your coworker. So our community involvement really is based upon us understanding and realizing that we have to take an interest in other people's struggle. And we have to take an interest in other people's understanding of what is going on right now in our country. Ross talked about being able to go to the state house and advocate for what we believe in and fight for what we want to see as far as policy. Deidre talked about us being able to get our young people to a place and create space for them and making sure that we're thinking differently. And with all of that, we have to do it as a community. So I want to read to you the definition of community. As a matter of fact, the definition of community says a group of people living in the same place having a particular characteristic in common, a feeling of fellowship with each other as a result of sharing common attitudes, interests, and goals. If you go and you Google the definition, after you've Googled the definition of community, you Google community involvement, it then tells you that community involvement is the power to bring positive, measurable change to both the communities in which you operate and your businesses. Community involvement examples include in-kind and financial donations, employee volunteer days, enduring nonprofit partnerships, and a lot more. So my question is, how many of us are truly involved? Are we truly looking at where we are when it comes to the word community? And then when we finally get to that space called community, are we looking at how we are involved with that community? The definition talks about the power of the collective, the power of the voice. And let me just say that as a community, not one person can do anything by themselves. We have to do it as a community. If we want to support the visionary leaders that Deidre and Heather are going after with 2020 Vision Pack, then we need your help to get involved. We need your help to make sure that you decide that this community has a goal that I want to help them reach, that this community has a space that I want to be involved in, that this community has a place that I want to be in. If you see something like the NAACP, the National Action Network, Iowa CCI, the No Justice, No Peace, New Frontier Action Fund, if you see stuff like the ACLU, like Des Moines Discovery Group, if you see groups like this getting involved, they're getting involved not because they just simply found something that, oh, I just want to get involved. No, they found something that they were willing to sacrifice for. I take you back to the story of the young man that I told in the beginning. This young man had a moment where he had to sacrifice playing with his daughter for the safety of them both. And so I ask you the question, what are you willing to sacrifice? What are you willing to put on the line so that community and involvement can meet each other after we dismiss from this call? What are you willing to say, you know what, there is a young person that I have time for and I'm going to be in community with them? What is the policy that you are willing to put your body, to put your voice on the line for, to stand up for what is right? What is that moment? What is that policy? Who is that young person? What is that community that you are willing to say? This is what community involvement looks like. There was a play by Sammy Davis Jr. in the 1970s right there in New York. And the play was called Stop the World, I Want to Get Off. And 2020 has presented us a lot of those moments of stop the world, I want to get off. With COVID wrecking our communities, and we're losing nearly 1,000 Americans every day. With finances being on the stretch, with businesses being closed, with Black men and women being shot and killed and murdered by state-sanctioned security guards. We have to do a better job at community. And once we do a better job at community, the involvement piece comes naturally. Because you would not sit back and allow one of your community members to be murdered at the hands of a police officer. You would not sit back and allow an organization like the 2020 Vision PAC not have the resources that they need, because you will go out and help fundraise and make sure and volunteer and do things for free because you believe in that community. So I beg the question, how many of us are first ready to be a community? And if we're ready to be a community, how many of us are ready to be involved? What is your community? And are you ready? I can tell you right now that 2020 has been the place where if you don't know if you're ready, I don't know what year could have brought you to this place, because 2020 has said to us all, you should be ready to go. You should be ready to advocate. You should be ready to mentor. You should be ready. We've been forced in our homes due to this coronavirus. A lot of people have lost finances. Some people find themselves being in a depressed state. And then we had the derecho storm come sweeping through Iowa. I hadn't even heard of a storm like this until this year. And for some of our community members, what was happening to them mentally by being forced in quarantine started to happen to their homes physically. The walls were caving in. They were losing hope. But I'll close with this. We now have an opportunity of hope, because every single one of you on this call has decided that this is my community and that I'm going to get involved. Thank you so much, Fred, for having us. Thank you to Ras and Deidre for kicking us off. And at this time, I'll stop and open it up for questions. Fred, I think there were a few in the chat that I may have missed. Fred, you're on mute.
I am scrolling up. I see several suggestions for leadership opportunities. Bob had one here. Bob asks, Ras, with the polarization of D's and R's at the state capitol, and the R's hold on power in the House, Senate, and Governor's office, how do we meaningfully and effectively advocate for various things when any progressive ideas will go into the wastebasket?
No, I think that's a great question, Bob, and that's my specialty. No, but I think the truth is that this is a two-way street. Advocacy goes both ways. Meeting people where they are goes both ways. Even if we don't like the fact that my Republican peers may have different beliefs on things, different perspective, doesn't mean that we don't have to try to meet them where they are. And that means talking about things in a way that may be helpful for them to understand. One thing that I was able to do when we talked about police reform this last session was the financial impact that unjust laws has on us as taxpayers, right? We all like better roads, right? We all like to rebuild our bridges. We all like new, safe infrastructure. But if we continue to allocate taxpayer dollars to incarcerate someone for who's on probation for a speeding ticket, right? Then we're wasting taxpayer dollars. So you can meet them where they are by talking a language that they understand. Now, what we can't confuse that with, though, is sacrificing our values, right? Sacrificing what we stand on. But we're talking about having conversations with other human beings in a way that is persuasive, truthful, but also forward thinking. So I believe that you have to find what their carrot is. Find out what those two things are that you can collaborate on and move forward. Having the Republican trifecta at the Capitol does nothing for me but it helps me to understand that what's going to happen is going to be predictable and consistent, right? I know what they're going to go for, and I know how they're going to operate in trying to achieve that goal, which means that I have to figure out what that carrot is for them. What is that thing that can help me to build a relationship? What is that topic, and how do we move forward, right? If we both have a list of 10 things, chances are there's only 2 that overlap, but that's where I'm going to allocate my time, is on those 2. So in this year, I can tell you, for me, I'm going to be focusing on what regulations do we have on the books that are archaic and stop small business expansion? 2 years ago, it was a fact that you couldn't have a mobile barber shop, right? It was just on the books because we had never had it before. Those are areas where I can collaborate with my Republican peers and do some things about economic inclusion across our state. So that's where I'm going to focus and allocate my time, is collaborating on the things that overlap and that we both want to see move forward.
Thank you. We are going to go into breakout groups in about 10 or 12 minutes, and we'll engage questions together in small groups. But go ahead and send your questions to the chat for our panelists. Here's one for our panelist from Mary Chapman. Can there be advocacy for paid internship opportunities for students on a career track where those opportunities make a difference in future employment?
Deidre, I'll let you take that one.
Yeah, so there are a few organizations in our community, Dr. Chapman. One you're very well, I think you're familiar with a couple of them, but they host summer youth employment programs. Evelyn K. Davis Center for Working Families does it, and Oak Ridge does it as well. Oak Ridge Neighborhood does it as well. And they place students in internship opportunities with employers, hoping that the employers are going to say yes. They make those asks to employers, and there have been a number of employers that have signed on to do that, including some departments within the state, DNR. You've had Principal, you've had Wellmark, you've had Nationwide, and then you've had some other small businesses and nonprofits throughout the community, like Goodwill, I know, has accepted some, and things along those lines. And sometimes the employer has the ability to pay the student, but sometimes the employer doesn't have the ability to pay the student. And so that's when public-private partnerships come into play, whereas those individuals who have the resources but may not need the bodies, may not need the students, can actually afford or help fund those students being a part of these summer youth employment programs. Now, what I know that many of these organizations would like to see is year-round employment. I've provided financial education through the work that I do with our coaches to these students. And when we sit down with them, they get a spending plan at the beginning of the year, or the beginning of the summer. And a lot of times a part of that spending plan is paying bills in the household. That parent is needing for that student to take part in these jobs because it's helping cover costs in the household. What we try to make sure, though, is that the students still reap some benefit, some monetary value from their experience, just so they understand that they can get something out of earning money as well. But I know that there has been a call for that to be more of a year-round program to help our students year-round. And it's done in such a way that it doesn't detract them from their educational studies as well. There's tutoring that's provided if those students are taking place in summer school. But needless to say, it's building a community and helping to reinforce good behaviors on the workforce and things along those lines.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. We have another question. This is from Renee. For Rob and Deidre.
Hey, Fred.
Yes.
Hey, Fred, real quick, Jackie had a question. She said it was easier to say it than write it. So, and then we'll go to Renee's question, which is next.
Okay, great. Thank you.
And I just have to make a comment about something Deidre just said. For those of you who are looking to do something, take a summer youth employment individual. I mean, if Goodwill could do it, everybody can do it. And it's what, $12 an hour, Deidre? It's a game changer. And quite honestly, I think it's a travesty that not all companies who have the means to be participating in this program, that's just a labor of love that I know Marvin DeJear works on. So anyways, my question is this, and thank you, it's just easier to say. I've served on boards, I've worked for boards, and it always seems like there's this professional hurdle that somebody has to step over to be able to be qualified to serve on boards. And I'm wondering if maybe some of you on the call might be able to point to boards that have a lower threshold or a lower access point, and that I think would be really helpful for Deidre or others that are trying to put people on boards. And that really is cross-cutting regardless of race, but it's really about age. And how do you work with a board and help them understand that they may not have all the technical qualifications, but they are bringing a perspective that is not already met on the board. And so this is just, it's both a question, and maybe I'll look to Liz Buck or, but help Deidre and others identify where are best practice boards that are actually taking some risks and bringing on new voices and younger voices.
This is Renee. Go ahead.
Sorry, Renee, I'll just jump real quick. This is Matthew Gilbert. I really like your question, Jack. And what I would want to sort of look for are boards that really value succession, not when they need it, but value succession as a function of their mission and purpose and operation. And what happens is a lot of boards may not plant the seed of succession until it's too late. So boards that actually have succession as a component of their total governance and operation will really look for those young individuals and really try to build those gateways into the organization. Sometimes it just might be volunteering. Sometimes it also might be mentorship. But some of that low-hanging fruit really starts with boards really valuing succession, making that an integral part of their function and mission and operation. Sorry, Jackie, go ahead. Renee.
Yeah, this is Renee Hartman, and thank you to the panelists. You guys are doing a wonderful job. I appreciate just listening in on this. And I'd just like to add to what Matt just said as well. There are a number of nonprofits that have young advisory boards. I know Big Brothers Big Sisters of Central Iowa does, where we look for young leaders, emerging leaders that are wanting their voices to be heard, want to advocate on behalf of the mission, and give back to that organization. And then we use that advisory board and place members on our governing board. So there is succession planning and there is growth. So I look for those organizations that are offering not only a governance board and a chief fundraising board, but young advisory groups and boards for folks that are really trying to find their space and find a place where they can add value and could lead to other things for them within the organization.
Hey, thanks so much. Hey, thanks so much to you both. I'm so glad Councilwoman Renee brought up the component of fundraising. That is so important in today's time right now. If we're going to do any of this work, it's going to be relied on fundraising. And our young people, our emerging leaders that Deidre was talking about, is a key component of that. What Ross was talking about, what you advocate for, is a key component of that. And so fundraising definitely is definitely also going to be a part of that. And so I'm so glad that she brought that up, because I wanted to bring up the fact that we talk all the time about trying to do what we want to do in community, but we have to put dollars behind this stuff, right? 2020 Vision PAC is a PAC ran by a group of people who are community involved, who could use dollars to continue to spread the message, to continue to really advocate for these young people and bring up new leaders. So all the boards and stuff that we're even talking about, by getting them involved and by you making a donation to 2020 Vision PAC, then you help bring up more leaders that can be in spaces that Councilwoman Hartman was talking about, that Jackie Norris was talking about, that attorney Matt Gilbert was talking about. Those are spaces that we can do, but sometimes we neglect that component. And then the other component of it is volunteering, right? Sometimes we just need you to get involved. I know some people may want like a 3-page paper and a PowerPoint on what to do, but sometimes we don't have time for it. We just need you to jump in. And so there are spaces where right now, even with the 2020 Vision PAC, even if you jumped in right now, you could be helping with digital. You could be helping with writing. You could be helping with more leaders. Like, there's so much stuff that we could be doing. right? And even with the New Frontier Action Pack, I know that was a question on measuring how measuring success, right? It's all about community involvement. How do we make sure that we get people like Dr. Chapman, like Susan, like Bob, like Diane involved in what we're doing? I hate to speak for them, but I'm sure they wouldn't mind me saying this. Ras and Deidre aren't just doing this just to do it. They're doing it because the impact of what they're doing matters. It matters. Deidre said something that I always like to give her credit for, but I'm only going to give her credit for this one or two more times before I own this statement myself. And she said, she says, thank God that your impact isn't based upon the credit you receive. So basically what that means is most of us won't get the credit that you actually deserve for what you're doing. But thank God that your impact will be far beyond that. So I'm only going to credit her one more time with that when y'all hear me say it, and then I came up with that statement myself. So
let's get to one more question before we go into the breakout groups. I want to get back to Renee's question. She asked, Rob and Deidre, who run PACs, how is the success of your work measured?
Mm-hmm. So for us, we started doing this work and organizing before we were officially a PAC. We just started meeting once a week, asking people to tell us about their interests. We also taught them about our community capitals. I mean, community capitals are very important to the greater Polk County area. I mean, our city managers go to Iowa State, they learn about the community capitals. I took coursework at Iowa State to learn about them. And when we organize our communities that way, I think it's important for people to understand how their communities are organized. So we started with those capitals and helping people to understand those. Then we divided our state boards, the Polk County boards, and then the cities within the Polk County region. Each and every one of those public boards has a community capital attached to it. And so when someone says, this is my interest, I've learned about this capital, this is where I can add some value. Then we connect them with that list so that they can see what board or commission they'd be interested in getting on. And needless to say, many of those boards and commissions are not at capacity. So there's a lot of room for individuals to join at this point in time. The other way that we measure, because that's more of a qualitative component of measuring, which is getting people to commit to doing the surveys. The quantitative component is placing people on boards and commissions. And so that they can add some value there. And we quantify those numbers, and we've had some excellent progress just since, I think we started meeting in June, getting people placed on boards and commissions. I had a happy moment yesterday because one of the folks that, just to give you some background on the story, Councilman Josh Mandelbaum called us and said, hey, I need an individual who is interested in this specific topic. These are the demographics that we need. And I was like, I don't know. I don't know a woman who's interested in development off the top of my head. But we were able to go through that list, found an individual, and she was placed on the Housing and Appeals Board. And called yesterday because things were going on the board and needed some guidance on how to navigate some things and who to talk to. And I just gave her the number of who to talk to because I'm not the expert in the realm, but I was there to be able to give her some guidance on that specific challenge that she was having and getting access to some documents. And so it's not really a one and done situation. The other thing is to continue to keep them engaged and continue to keep them learning about the community beyond the board, beyond the scope of the commission that they may be sitting on. So that's personally how we measure things. And it's been great so far. Needless to say, all of this work has been done on the backs of volunteers. And so we're held accountable to these metrics, but once we get our dollars right, we'll have even more powerful metrics because we'll have people employed that can continue to do this work.
Yeah, so definitely donate. Thank you, Deidre. We measure our success by a few things. So we have policy development, we have community engagement, and then of course community education. So when we measure success, we're measuring based upon, have we pushed a policy that has been able to get over the threshold, or are we making moves on that policy? Another thing that we do as far as community engagement, some of you may have seen that Al Wumble and myself, we did a 26 city tour over the course of 30 days. We got out in the streets and we started making sure that we got engaged in our community all over the entire state of Iowa, from Sioux City to Davenport and all of the cities in between, to do voter registration, voter safety, voter activation, and make sure that we were making American democracy great again.
Great. Thank you. Let me interrupt so that we can get into the breakout groups. And
Yeah, are we running short on time, Fred?
We are like right on time and about 2 minutes behind. And breakout groups are very important in our group, and so we want to engage with each other. Rob has provided some questions that I put in the chat. Have you selected a new leader that you can mentor? What is your passion, and for what are you willing to advocate? How would you like to get involved? Go ahead. Thank you.
Yeah. So the first question was, have you selected a new leader for you to mentor? Are you ready to grab a young person? The second question is, what is your passion that you are willing to advocate for? And so, for example, education, environmental, healthcare, criminal justice, different things that you're willing to advocate for. And then the last question is, how would you like to get involved? You know, there's different ways to do it. There's donating, there's volunteering, there's joining these groups themselves, like the 2020 Vision Pact, the New Frontier Action Fund with No Justice, No Peace, NAACP, National Action Network, ACLU, Iowa CCI, different opportunities for you to join.
So even if you didn't have all the questions, the conversations I noticed were all engaging and vigorous. And so you all did just as well. So, and by the way, we will send you a copy of the chat. And also we will copy and paste into that. Rob has a list of organizations that to get involved in. So we'll include that. But let's take the next few minutes and just report out here in plenary how things, what you folks talked about. Things you wanted to share that were particularly insightful and or incisive in your observations and comments.
So Fred, I've done a lot of talking. So for my group, I'll kind of toss it over to either Cassie, Diane, or Heather, who may be able to give us a little bit more insight on what we discussed.
Okay.
Diane, would you like to kick us off?
Yeah, I will start. First of all, I want to be honest. I'm only here to pad Fred's numbers. I didn't know what I was getting into.
Geez. Unbelievable.
But I did get into something apparently. But we talked about, I think we talked about connecting. I think we were able to connect each other with different ideas and think about how we can work together and what we can each do. So I think just the idea of connecting with each other with all of our different backgrounds was one of the most important things I got out of our little session. So, but Heather, you know more than I do, so go ahead.
No, what I really appreciated is that we took the time to make sure to find out what all of us were doing and where our interests were. And then Rob, as he usually does, is very good about figuring out how to combine all of those pieces together. And so I'm working with the 2020 Vision Pact myself. And so we talked about opportunities to potentially do some cross-county information sessions, and potentially with Cassie and working with some of the environmental groups to kind of just equip people with that knowledge of what what their local impact can be in the different spaces for serving on a board or commission, or just learning what those spaces are and how to be able to best impact where you are at. So it was a really good discussion.
Thank you. Let's make sure that we hear from all the groups too, in the time that we have. What about another group?
I can talk if Susan and Jackie are okay with it. I think, you know, we might not have followed the discussion guide as well as we should have. But we really got into a conversation about boards and board strategy, and how, you know, like having a diverse board isn't necessarily a strategy for having programming that serves a diverse group of people. And it's like maybe one sort of, you know, brick in the wall, so to speak. And just as we were finishing, Jackie was talking about, you know, how important it was to have like the high level expert on the board versus, you know, other people, and the separation of the advisory board saying, oh, we want your opinion, but we don't want your vote, like that sort of thing. I think there's a lot of work that can go into strategic planning for nonprofits around sort of the board and the strategy to serve diverse groups of people versus always, I mean, the leadership part is really important, but it has to go beyond the leadership. So that's kind of, just from my experience, it's been an interesting, like trying to bring that up with the board that I'm on and trying to get them to talk about it and the awkwardness.
I think what I liked, and these weren't exactly John's words, but it was something like diversifying your board isn't a strategy, diversifying your programming is a strategy. And then you bring the board members from being relevant to a larger community. So,
yeah, great. Other groups?
Matthew, Deidre, you want to do it, or?
Go ahead, Deidre. Okay, all right, I got you. But no, we really spoke to with Bob's a lot of his experience with the natural capitals, right? And so we really were looking at how do we really, you know, not only increase access, but also increase, you know, the pool of leadership potential within the sort of natural capital. So everything that's sort of environmentally focused, and sort of some of the things we sort of spoke to, and Bob is saying, you know, he's out here, you know, recruiting, you know, nonstop. But we also have to sort of look at, you know, ways to really sort of give communities a little bit more exposure to the natural capitals, as well as helping them understand, as Ras mentioned when we began our conversation, right? You know, what is the meaning of our natural capital? How does this really impact you and your families? How does this impact you and your community? And we really felt that there were some real key really needs for us to be very intentional about that work. And so we were talking about some of the work that Deidre was doing, really centered around helping to really do some organizational mapping, but more importantly, really being able to identify leaders in pools, especially in an area like environmental science, where it's just a historic, you know, gap of exclusion, especially for communities of color, especially for our BIPOC communities. And so Bob was sort of giving us some strategies on some of the things he's done. Deidre was also offering some strategies as well. And I think what we were able to do was come up with some really cool, intentional things that we can do in the immediate time. And part of that is getting Bob sort of intentional and engaged in some of the conversations that are happening right now around building leadership capacity within the natural capital space. Anything I missed, Bob or Deidre?
Well, it's in addition to natural capital, we talked about, you know, all seven, and how depending on what interests you have, you can put your efforts behind those. But as Claudia talked about, don't forget arts and culture. And as Susan talked about, you know, don't forget hunger in the environment. So there's a lot of things that are out there. It's a question of a group of people wanting to do something and a group of organizations wanting to get people involved and figuring out a strategy to get those together. And Deidre's got a Wednesday group that apparently helps do that, and we need to multiply that times 10.
We have time for one more so that we can keep covenant with time. Is there someone else that wanted to report?
I wouldn't want to speak for everybody in our group, but we had a very nice conversation, Mary and Anthony, Sheena and I, pretty much centered around internships or, involving younger people at an earlier age. And as usual, just starting a conversation this morning at 7:30 and then where my brain went. So easy to add a young person to any board or commission. The only thing that we talked a little bit about was just the unintended challenges and maybe consequences of that decision. You have the unique challenges of transportation and connection and communication with a young person who we all don't necessarily consider every day. So if you do that, and I think that our group would probably come away saying, why wouldn't everybody do that? Why wouldn't everybody bring a young person onto their board for that voice? But you have to be conscious about how to connect those kids. That was just one topic, but as usual, my mind raced ahead to say, why wouldn't we make that a requirement for graduation? That everybody needed to have some exposure to a board or a commission before they graduated from high school.
That'd be great. Great. Well, thank you, Rob and Deidre and Ras for leading us this morning in this insightful and incisive discussion.
Thank you, Fred. Thank you, Fred.
You will all get a copy of the chat, and we're working on editing the video, polishing that a little bit. And we will also send you some organizations. Rob's going to send that, and I'll copy and paste that message so that you can know how you can get involved. Next month, in our December meeting on December 16th, we have Dr. Chris Grosskirth, who is going to be presenting to us. He's the author of Future Ready Leadership, Leadership for the Fourth Industrial Revolution. Fourth Industrial Revolution arises out of the work of the World Economic Forum, explores how technology, artificial intelligence, and related developments are impacting the future of work and our culture in general, and how we can adapt to that, what leadership would be needed to embrace that paradigm shift. And so that will be our meeting in December. Watch for the invitation that'll go out around the first of the month. To continue this conversation and others, join our Facebook group, DSM Discovery Group. Easy to find, and continue to add your comments and your thoughts and connections. So with that, thank you, everyone. Take very good care, and thank you for everything you do for our community.
Stay safe. Keep your mask on. Keep your distance.
Have a good day.
Thank you, everyone.